Similar question. Why the United Nations had to vote for Israel to exist? It's interesting. The whole nations of the world had to vote.
Yeah. Achayim v'livracha, to life and to blessings. How is it possible, folks, that the chosen people for the last almost 2,000 years, actually more than 2,000, have been ruled by other nations, by other peoples? If we're the chosen people, and chosenness means to be a light unto the nations, how's that possible? Now, the fact is, we see the Jewish people have been kicked out over 100 nations in the last 2,000 years. Over 100 nations, yeah. We were kicked out of England for almost 400 years. From 1200 something, by Richard the Lionheart, until the 1600s. Long time. That's just one nation. And kicked out of over 100 places. How is that? Makes sense. If we are, so some people want to say, yeah, we're God's chosen people to suffer. Good try. And some want to play the victim card. That's what peoples do, right? That they're a victim of other oppressors. And no, I'm not going there at all, because that's not the Jewish way. That's not the Jewish way, is to see that we're victims, because if you're a true believer in God, God runs the world, God allows these things to happen. How is it possible? Right? How does evil prevail to such a degree that the people who are supposed to be a light unto the nations, are persecuted so much? And it doesn't end. Look what's going on today in the world. Right? Pretty a strong question. Welcome to Tanya Today. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you Chabad Zich and Kedeshim in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We continue in the 25th letter, where we spoke about yesterday, to know thyself. Right? To know thyself. Right? What does it mean to know yourself? Well, to know your divine self is what we spoke about yesterday. Now we go to know another element. Zelu mazeh. God created one thing opposite to the other. We've got a lofty divine soul, but God creates not only the holy side, he also creates the counter side, called Sitter Acher, the other side, right? Holy divine side, it's got a very clear name to it. The other side is just the other side, right? And just like the holy side, if you recall, yesterday we spoke, our divine soul has 10 components to it, 10 powers of the soul, 3 intellectual and 7 emotional, as we explained at length yesterday. So likewise, right, we have also the other side in us, And it's also got 10, but they're called 10 crowns of the king. Imagine putting 10 kings in one room. Is that called a power struggle or what? Right? Imagine. Yeah. 10, well, we you get that today. 10 leaders coming together. There's a great power struggle over there, right? So this is the metaphor that's used that's used in Kabbalistic teachings in the Zohar. 10 crowns of impurity. Why is it impure? Because holiness is inclusiveness, right? So Chesed's going to get together with Gvura. Kindness and judgment can come together, but on the unholy side, kindness and power and strength of judgment, they don't get along because each one sees the value in them, right? Like the strong ego of each king that sees the value in himself and his kingdom. So each kingdom wants to rule. Hey, interesting. This is emblematic of the nations of the world. If you go through the history of the nations of the world, what do you find? What is the history of the nations of the world? If you go back, right? Is battling one nation against another nation. It's all about survival. It's all about power and dominating. Exactly. That's what it is. Jewish history is Rashi, Rambam, Holy Temple, the high priest. Now, of course, when you have non-Jews are going to give the history of the Jewish people, so they give it from their perspective. Also battle, so they'll speak about the battles. I mean, yes, are there battles but that's not what we're about. Which, by the way, parenthetically, I must say this. Wow. L'chaim. Listen to this, folks, and tell me what you think. There's a story with the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shalom Dovber. He passed away in 1920. He was in a museum looking at a battle scene, a picture of a battle scene, and very intently looking at it. And a chassid that was with him said, Rebbe, what do you see that you're so intently looking? He says, I want to perceive the difference between giving yourself over for a holy cause and complete stupidity and foolishness, right? And the difference is worlds apart. The perception of it is a hairbreadth of a difference. So I'm going to give you the modern day example of what that means. Two peoples are holding guns, a rifle. One is an Israeli soldier, and one is a Hamas. Look at the world we're living in today. People can't make a difference between them. They think, actually, they think that the Hamas. So many think that Hamas is okay, and the Israelis, is a horrific person. How do they make that mistake? Because the worlds apart between them. How do you know the difference? That they're right. As Golda Meir said, if Hamas would put down their arms, there would be no more fighting. If Israel puts down their arms, they'd be slaughtered, right? So the arms that the Israelis are using are to protect only. The only way you can protect sometimes is you have to defeat evil. Their arms is to destroy. Very simply. So anyway, why am I bringing that up? Is that's a perfect example of what it means. God makes the holy side and makes the other side, the unholy side, right? The holy side, they're working together in unison because they have one common aim: to create peace by destroying the enemy, right? Right. And if there would be peace, then they wouldn't have to destroy the enemy, right? Now you can go into whatever arguments you want of them. I'm not going there, right? And the others, right? No. So very clear. So now the truth is, every human being has both sides of them. The nations of the world, they embody that, right? They embody that. Jewish people embody bringing holiness to this world. Just see from the conflict right now, right? And the fact that other nations are like, it's just a pure, it's all political. It's got nothing to do with being holy, nothing to do about justice. Not for a moment, not for a moment does it have to do with anything. It's got to do with political gain. That's all it is. That's why the leader here in Canada did what he did, because, there's a lot more of them than Jews. And they're united front. Anyways, that's all. I'm just bringing that just to show the distinction, how clear it is, right? That's the nations of the world. But the truth is, it's every human being. Individually, we are like that. God creates, gives us a good side, and gives us right? And as it brings down, that man rules over man to his detriment. What does that mean? In other words, there's the evil man and the good man in us. And the evil man rules over the good man. Whoa, what does that mean? So this actually is the mystery of the exile, that the Shekhinah, right, the divine presence of God, is in Klippa, is in a shell that covers over it, that doesn't allow it to have its impact. So God doesn't have his holiness having its impact in a time of exile. Is God's presence there? Yes. Exile, what does exile mean? Exile means like a crown prince who's in exile. Means he's still the crown prince, but he can't make his impact. And as his position would be if he was in the palace of the king. Well, he's not able to do that. That's why every single individual is that way. We have an animal soul, and we have a rational soul and a divine soul. And. So the evil man rules over the sacred man. That's the nature of this world, right? But it's a detriment. Why is detriment? Because when evil rules, they only rule for a time period. And afterwards, it's over. When we see the nations of the world, they ruled for a time, and then it's over. Whether it's the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, Byzantines, and so on and so forth. And then it's over. Why? Because evil does have its sway, but it's only temporary. And that's why right now the nations of the world dominate the Jewish people. Because we're in exile. Exile means the presence of God itself is in exile. Of course, the Jews are in exile. Even though we have the land of Israel, we're still in exile because we don't have the presence of God. Right? Even though we have miracles from God today in Israel, what's going on is unbelievable. But we're still in exile, very clearly, right? And as a result, the nations of the world, they dominate the Jewish people, because what dominates the world today is Klippa, is a negative force, the shell that covers over the holiness of everything in the world, of the divine in the world. It's covered over. And that gives the strength to the nations of the world. as a result. Now, the Alter Rebbe says, how could God allow this to happen? That's a good question, because we're not talking about just the Jewish people here. We're talking about even his divine presence, which is through the Jewish people, is in exile. Like, that needs an extensive understanding, right? But the fact remains, says the Alter Rebbe, that this is what it is, right? That the klipa, the shell of vitality, is covering over the inner vitality of the divine, the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God, and that is nurtured to the nations of the world. They get their vitality from there, from the exterior, the outer will of God, right? As opposed to Jewish people, they get it from the inner will of God. The nations of the world, what are they about? Again, as we said earlier in history, look what they power. What's going on now? Why are nations against Israel? Power. It's got nothing to do with righteousness. It's not. Let's not fool ourselves for a moment. Not got to do with anything righteous. Right? Power. Right? Power is right for the leader. I'm talking about the leaders. And others is just some other craziness we won't go into now. That doesn't touch the inner dimension of God. What's the inner will of God? Mitzvah. That's why Jewish history is about Torah and mitzvahs. It's about holy temple where, holy land where you can do specific mitzvahs, holy people and their teachings. The Alter Rebbe, who passed away over 200 years ago, and his teachings are more popular today than ever before. Because we touch the inner will of God, the inner holiness of God. But that part is in exile. And what's left is the external will as a means to an end. And that the nations get from. And therefore that expresses itself with wealth, honor, physical pleasures, and power. But it's okay. The Jewish people will never give up what they have, because we touch the core of God, to be a light unto the nations, to take the light of Torah mitzvahs, and to inspire the nations of the world. And ultimately, we're going to succeed. There's no question about it. If you're a real believer, and now I'm going off for a moment, okay? I'm going off on what? Because if you really believe in God, that means you really believe in God's goodness. That means the power of the nations and the evil of the nations is only temporary, and that's not what God wants. It's only expression of his outer will, that God allows that. But he's allowing it only. As we're going to learn in a specific way, I'm now going to speak in a very general way, but tomorrow we're going to continue with this idea and what that means on a personal level. We'll get to that. Okay? But now I'm speaking in a very general manner. The purpose of that is in order that the darkness of the world should be overcome with a greater light. Just means that the Jewish people have to dig deeper inside of them to find that inner light and to express that. And that's what's happening. Folks, the 20 hostages that just came out of Gaza, that were there for over 2 years in darkness, some in a cage, treated worse than an animal, by people that you can't even call them animals, because that would be a degradation to the animal kingdom. And yet, what happened to those, to so many, if not all of them, most of them? Many of them went in with not such strong faith, but they came out with amazing faith. They were in such a dark place, but the light of God was with them. Story after story. Unbelievable. They didn't come out, okay, we're going to go and destroy Hamas. They came out, wow, God was with me. In the darkest, deepest places, the darker it got, the more I sensed God was there, guiding, taking care. Can you imagine that just thinking to get an extra pita, that was God taking care of you? Unbelievable. That's the uniqueness. Uniqueness of the Jewish people. And that's what's bringing out over here. All right. So yes, nations, be wise and recognize you should go with the light of God. It's here. And what do we want? What God wants. Another mitzvah. More divine light in the world. And eventually we're going to do that because we're going to bring the final redemption. It's happening. It's happening now. We don't want to control people. We want people to control themselves because they are inspired by the divine in the world and the divine in them. That's what God wants, right? That's what God wants. Where do you find this idea, this notion anywhere else? Where? Everybody wants to have their divine, what's the word? The feeling they're on the divine mission and they want to control others. And that you have to follow my way. Now, yes, it is following the Torah's way, but it's about you coming to that realization, not being forced into it. Being compelled on your own cognition and your own choice that, yes, the light of Torah is a light that to be followed. Okay, any questions? Lori, can we be filled with joy in the light and go on the way ignoring the corruption? Is it selfish to joy while surrounded by evil? Excellent question. So how do you call out the evil? I think you call it out the way we just did. I think that's the good way to call out the evil, first of all. And secondly, the way evil is going to be destroyed, ultimately, is not through guns, but through mitzvahs, through Torah. Ultimately, that's how it's going to happen. So that's what we need to strengthen more than anything, specifically amongst the Jewish people, but all of humanity, to increase in goodness and kindness. That's how we're going to change the world, right? And bring the consciousness of God and goodness of kindness with a divine consciousness that this is what God needs from me. Thank you. That was excellent, Laurie. Question? Yeah. Any other questions? Comments? Um, okay. Any questions here? No, I don't see. Okay, Rambam coming up. Thank you, folks. Amazing.